Okay, I'm going to show you how to make muntins. If you like the window on the left, but your windows look like the one on the right, I'm going to show you how to put those fake or faux muntins on your window for $2. And this is how I did it. First thing you need to know is the dimensions. My windows, those two windows I have in there, have one horizontal and two vertical muntins per window pane. So I've got to find the center for the horizontals and then the two verticals. Right there. Once I mark my line, that's my reference points, I know exactly where to attach. Step one, or step two, let's get some windows clean. Really important, you want the paint to stick. Now this is a straight edge I'm using out of a piece of flat aluminum. It's half an inch wide, 1/16 inch thick, and 2 foot long, 24 inches. Basically, I'm applying two strips of 1-inch painter's tape to one side of it. The reason I used 1-inch painter's tape and not 2-inch is because I didn't have any 2-inch painter's tape. Once it's applied precisely where it needs to be, I very carefully cut through the tape, but not too much pressure because you don't want to scratch the glass. Okay. As I cut through the tape and I pull the straight edge away, I make sure I press down those cut edges so that I have a good tight adhesion between the tape and the glass so you don't get bleed through on the paint. The horizontal one's in place. Now it's really important you make sure these things are vertical and precisely aligned because they will not notice if they're off at a 1/4 inch or so either way, but if they're not straight and parallel and perpendicular to each other, it'll stick out like a sore thumb. Now at the cross point between these, the horizontal and vertical muntins, I'm very, very carefully slicing out the overlap piece using a nice sharp edge and minimal pressure. Take your time here because you've got to this point this is the finishing part where you're getting ready to put paint on. If you don't do this right, whatever paint you put on there is going to look like junk. Now the benefit is you could easily remove these with a razor edge, but if you do it right, you won't have to repeat. Here I'm just putting a little tape on the frame so I don't get paint on it. The next step is I have to translate those dimensions for the vertical muntins down to the bottom pane. Now the bottom pane is narrower than the upper pane, and instead of trying to measure and calculate exact position and making a potential error, all I'm doing is I'm translating that line from the upper one to the bottom one, and then I'll measure the actual dimensions and transfer that dimension down to the bottom of this pane, to the frame. And then of course I'll line up the straight edge accordingly. Now it's really important that they match exactly because if they don't, it's going to stick out. You aren't going to like the result, and you want it to look as nice on the inside as outside. Anyway, once you have your alignment, you just repeat what you did on the top. Place the straight edge in, slice off the tape. You get two beautiful parallel lines when you do it this way. The big trick is they need to be straight, and the horizontal one needs to be perpendicular to those two verticals. If you do that, you're golden. Trick here is just take your time, be careful, make sure your dimensions are right, because when you get to the point of putting paint on, it all has to come together. Now I'm using a 1/2 pint of rust-oleum flat white. This is the only thing I actually purchased for this. The rest I had, the aluminum, the paintbrush, tape. That's all pretty much anything you'd have in your hobby shop. But if you had to buy it, you'd probably spend about $15 for everything. And that'd be enough to do 6 windows. Now I'm putting the first coat of paint on, carefully applying it between the lines, of course. And you're going to get some bleed through of the light, which is good because the light behind the windows, or on the outside of the windows, is going to show you where your coverage is incomplete or inconsistent. And you don't have to worry about full coverage the first time. This is just like a primer coat. It gets the lines established, and it shows you how it's going to kind of look when you're done. Just take your time, apply it, don't get sloppy. Now, here's a close-up of the cross where those 2 points come together, and you can see there's a little gap there at the corner where I missed some, and that's the light bleed through, and that's really good. It shows you where you don't have a consistent coating of paint. All you have to do is touch that up and then wait for them to dry. So we'll do the last little bit. Like I said, take your time. The painting is only 10% of the work. 90% of the work on a paint project like this is getting ready to paint. 10% is actual painting. Yeah, maybe 9%. Then you got 1% cleanup. But be careful, take your time, and the results will show. Now here I'm checking to make sure it's dry. It took about 15 minutes in my room for this to dry. There was no gloss, and I'm actually touching the paint that's on the tape, not on the window. Once it's dry to the touch, then I come back and put a second coat on. You may need a third coat. I only needed the 2. It was adequate for this. Now I wouldn't do this in my home. You could very easily dress up your windows like this. You could put all kinds of patterns on it. But this is out of my pole barn in my daughter's art studio, so it's not as critical that it looks as nice. But this turned out really well, and it's a great effect. And if by chance you don't like the result, you can take this off in 5 minutes. You can take all this paint off with a scraper with a razor blade in it. They make a paint remover scraper for that purpose for like $3-4 at any hardware store. Now this is the trick to getting the tape off. Once the paint is completely dry, and I'm saying dry to the touch, not days or weeks later, I'm talking about a half hour later, you pull the tape back at a 45-degree angle to the paint, or the pane of the glass. This is just like tearing a piece of paper. If you take a piece of paper and hold it between your 2 hands and 2 fingers and peel it, you're pulling it apart at about 45 degrees. That is the ultimate shear point, or the angle of shear that you want. I'm also, as I'm peeling it back, I'm also pulling it slightly away from the painted edge. You really want to be careful doing this. Take your time, because you don't want to pull the paint away from the glass, because then you either start over or give up, but it won't look nice. You can patch it up later, but it's easier just to do it right the first time. Now you can see I'm pulling the tape away at an angle away from the paint edge, and still at 45 degrees to the pane of glass. You see that mark in the middle of the window? That's an example of how easy it will be to clean. Oh, there's my UFO. Caught that in the video. How about that? Wonder what that was. Anyway, take your time. Peel the tape away. This is the final process where you need to be very careful. You don't want to mess up your hard work to this point. Now doing these 2 windows took me about an hour and a half to do them all. Mostly because I'm trying to figure out what I want to do and how I want to do it. But it was, like I said, it's 90% preparation and 9% paint and 1% cleanup. I'm using just the razor knife so that I can get under the edge of the tape and keep my fingers away from it, and I run less risk of damaging the existing paint for this Muntins. Anyway, there's the smudge I put on the window so you could see how easy it is to remove. I'm just using a single-edged razor blade, but if you used a paint scraper razor blade paint remover for glass, it works the same way. It's just I didn't have one handy. But you can see how easy this comes off. Now this is going to take probably a month for this paint to completely harden. So you can wash these windows, but wait till it's completely hardened, at least a month. Anyway, that's the final result. What do you think? Hope you like it. If you like it, give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe. I got more little projects coming along and engineering.
Are you videotaping still? Good?
Thanks for watching.
No, don't put your fingers in front of it, honey. All right, hit stop. All right, hit stop.